What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast. I am Raymond Summerlin. It is the week of the AFC and NFC championship games, which means I'm going to preview those with kind of a fantasy lean, but also just, previewing the games as a whole with the one, the only Rich Hribar. How you doing, Rich?
Doing good. We're here, man. 3 games left. This is kind of the fun weekend. Hopefully the games are good. We always talk about divisional round always ends up being the best round. And, the games ended up being really good last weekend, and it was a lot
More
of
fun,
fun.
yeah.
I don't know what kind of shakes out and who you're leaning for this week, but we've got kind of
You do know who I'm
fun
leaning for
matchups.
this
That
week.
is true. I do, because in the background, yeah. But if the upsets did win, it would be kind of fun to end the season the way we started it, because Chiefs Lions opened the season on Thursday night. That would be kind of funny if they were the Super Bowl. But definitely both teams are moving uphill this week.
Yeah, for sure they're moving uphill. The Lions especially are moving uphill, but we'll get to all of that. I want to talk with you. So, we have more time these weeks with only, 2 games and 4 games last week. And I wondered if you have gotten, I know throughout the season you just have no time. You haven't even
Yeah.
played the new Spider-Man. Have you gotten into it? Have the games, this is a leading question because I'm going to tell you about a game. But have you gotten back into the gaming world? Have you started to play the ones that you missed?
Yeah, I have. I've actually finished the Spider-Man 2. What's like the third Spider-Man game? It's officially Spider-Man 2, so I did play that. Me and my wife have a list of shows that we're trying to run through. We've started the latest season of Fargo, so are in
There
motion
you
on
go.
at least consuming some pop culture.
There you go. The new season of True Detective. I don't know if it's good, but it's spooky. I'll tell you that. I don't know if it's good, but it is definitely spooky. I've been playing a lot of. If you see bags under my eyes, I've been staying up late playing a lot of Pow World, which is a blatant Pokemon ripoff. That kind of like Pokemon and Rust had a baby, and you can you can use some of the Pokemon as guns and I'll tell you what, Rich, you need to get this game. This game is unbelievable. This game is
The
so
endorsement.
much fun. It is a life drain. It's an absolute life drain. You'll look up, and for an hour, you've been harvesting ore with a pickaxe, and you go, "Where did that hour go?" But I tell you what, man, this is my favorite form of copyright infringement that I've ever seen. Is this Pal World game? It is wonderful. You got
I've
to get
seen
on it.
some I've seen some stuff out there on it. I haven't delved into it into the weeds, but I have seen a lot of people are playing it.
It's so funny they didn't even try. Like literally, there's just Pikachu. Like I don't even remember what they call him. I just call him Pikachu. It is like the it's like remember like in those weird kiosks in the middle of malls when malls exist. Hi kids, there are these things called
Yeah.
malls. And they had these weird kiosks, and you could find like instead of Bugs Bunny, it'd be like Berry Bunny or something like that. It's that version of Pikachu, but it's very clearly supposed to be Pikachu. It's my favorite thing in the world. I love it. Go play Pal World. They don't sponsor the podcast. I'm just here. It's been so fun. Apparently, producer Sean tells us that pick it up now because the Pokemon Company themselves are investigating them for copyright infringement. There's no investigation to be done. It is most certainly copyright infringement. But there we go. Uh, I
They
guess I
haven't
should
made a good
advertise.
Pokemon game in like 10 years, so it's probably the best version, right?
This is their fault. They
Yeah.
could have made this game 10 years ago. Like, just do what the fans want. Obviously, this is what the fans want. Anyway, sorry. I guess I should do some advertisements for the website we work for. Sharpfootballanalysis.com. Great website. Go and check it out. Our postseason package. Still got 2 more weeks left to make money with our postseason package. Use promo code 75 off for 75% off our weekly postseason plan. All right, let's do it. Let's talk football, I guess. Let's get rid of the nerd stuff and do some more nerd stuff and talk football. First game this week, Chiefs at Ravens. Ravens 3.5 point favorites. Total 44.5. That total is interesting because this is Lamar Jackson versus Patrick Mahomes. And you would think, well, we're going to be looking at some offense in this game. But I mean, this looks a lot more like a defensive battle. These two defenses have been two of the best defenses in the league all season long, two legit really good defenses. And I know you had a lot of stats about that in your worksheet column, which you go read at sharpfootballanalysis.com. But I mean, I think that that's really the starting point here. The defenses and maybe some of the trump cards that these offenses might have to use to attack the weaknesses, however small they are, of each of these two defenses.
Yeah, this first game definitely looks like potentially a defensive battle with the way both of these teams
Potentially. Yeah.
all season. I mean, they have been two of the best defenses all year, and I think too when you look at like this iteration of this Chiefs team, this is by far the best defense that they've had, in the Mahomes era. And I think a large
Absolutely.
testament too to them is that they don't get turnovers, which you'd think like, all right, that's a bad thing. But like, I think it's a testament to how good they've been because they've still been this good without turnovers. We've seen a lot of defenses that rely on turnovers. And then when they don't get turnovers, like in these big playoff spots, they get kind of exposed a little bit for maybe they played a little bit over their heads. They were reliant on the short fields. Like the Chiefs don't really get a lot of turnovers, and they've been like this good in terms of like a yards per play basis. They allow the fewest scoring plays per game in the NFL. So they're going to need that here because, we'll probably get into it a little bit deeper, but like this little mini surge of this Chiefs offense, I think can definitely be kind of questioned based on the injuries their opponents have had. And they're not facing a beleaguered, Baltimore defense, that is missing key pieces here. So they're going to have to punch up not only against a team that's healthy, but a team that has been arguably maybe the best defense in the NFL themselves. And just from a top-down perspective, I think it's hard to get away from what we've seen from the Chiefs over the course of the season compared to what we've seen from the Baltimores and push back against this spread. I mean, Baltimore has been the best team in the NFL this season. They have the most wins against teams with a winning record this season, 11. They have the most wins against 2023 playoff teams, 7. They have outscored 2023 playoff teams by 14 points per game. And granted, whatever matchup we get in the Super Bowl, if they happen to face the Ravens, they dusted both of those NFC teams as well. So the Ravens are here. This is the best look that they're going to have, right? Like, I feel like the Ravens have to cash this one in. Like, this is as good as a look like this Lamar Jackson Ravens version of the team has had since they've had him at quarterback.
And I think you always talk about Daryl Morey always talked about this, the GM of now the 76ers for a long time, the Rockets, who are my favorite NBA team. He always talked about championships in terms of percentages, and I think that that's a really good way to think about it because you can have the best team in the league. We were actually talking on a call yesterday about that really juggernaut Packers team that just happened to lose, I believe, to the 49ers. And so you could have the best team in the league and not win a Super Bowl. Super Bowl is kind of random. The single elimination tournament is random. So you have to think about it in terms of percentages. And when you think about it in terms of percentages, this is the best percentage chance that the Ravens have and have had in a long time. It definitely had in the
Yep.
Lamar Jackson era and might have again because these windows are, we don't like to think of them as small. I guess they're not small if you have Patrick Mahomes, but for most mortal teams, these windows are small, and so you have to, really take advantage of it. And so I agree with you. I also agree with you about this line. You know that I think that this line is absurd. It's -3.5, -4. I think this line should be closer to 7. I think the Ravens are very clearly a better team than the Chiefs. They have been a better team all year long. But the one kind of mitigating factor there, well, two mitigating factors. One, the Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes is going to go down as one of the greatest quarterbacks that ever played this game. Patrick Mahomes has, you can throw the kind of aspersions in there about what they faced the last 2 weeks, and all of those are fair. That what they faced with Miami and that defense, especially what they did to the Bills, was how much they used 12 and 13 personnel to really take advantage of their linebacking situation. But I think that when you just watch Patrick Mahomes, these last 2 weeks have been 2 of his better games. He's clearly rounding into form at the right time. They are throwing to Travis Kelce a lot more than they had been. And obviously they are focusing on their good players and trying to make their offense work. And so if it clicks because he's Patrick Mahomes, that's an out. The other out they have is, again, this Ravens defense, as good as they've been, they have not been very good against the run. We did see them be able to shut down Houston's running game last week. That's Houston's running game. They haven't been able to run all season. Since week 10, the Ravens run defense ranks 27th in success rate allowed. They rank 29th in yards per carry allowed. And the thing about this Ravens defense is the one thing, if you were thinking about, okay, how am I going to attack this defense? You would say, I'm going to run the football at them. I'm going to force them to get into heavy boxes. And then once you get the Ravens into heavy boxes, all of a sudden their defense isn't quite as good. If you look at them in a light box, they are number 2 in EPA per attempt among defenses, at least they were in the regular season. With a heavy box, they are number 24 in EPA per attempt against the pass. So there's an avenue here for the Chiefs to run the ball, have success with it with Isaiah Pacheco against this defense, force them in a heavy box, and then have success with Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. but also you're kind of threading the needle there. So there's paths certainly here for the Chiefs and their offense, but I think it's a narrower path than maybe what we have on the Ravens side.
Yeah, and when you look at it under the hood, a lot of those like stats that you brought up, I mean, how did this iteration of the Chiefs take advantage of that, right? Like who are you scared of, getting the Ravens into heavy boxes and then exploiting on the outside? Like who
Rashee
amongst
Rice.
yeah, who does all of his but Rashee Rice does all of his damage shallow and then after the catch. Like he doesn't do
the reclaimed body of Marquez
yeah.
Valdes-Scantling that we saw last week.
So I don't even think a lot of like those metrics you bring up even really particularly help the Chiefs here. I don't really think that they do. I don't think the Chiefs have the outside weaponry to get the Ravens into, all these situations and then take advantage. Like what matchup are they taking advantage of by doing that? Whereas you can look at teams that have had success against the Ravens and like some of the downfield guys that have had success, like maybe like a George Pickens or something, or like the 49ers when they got George Kittle into spots. Like I don't see that on this Chiefs team. Like this team is literally funneled through Rashee Rice, who appears to be kind of banged up. We haven't seen kind of what's going on in practice reports yet for this week, but he was limping at the end of the game. He was already dealing with a hamstring injury going into Buffalo. He was also dealing with a knee injury. Travis Kelce, although the production has been better these 2 weeks of the postseason, he still is not the Travis Kelce of yesteryear. Like he still doesn't look that part. And we're not facing two teams that are just obliterated at the linebacker position. I mean, the Ravens are going to have Roquan Smith. They're going to have Kyle Hamilton in this game. Kelce, even though he's looked better, still hasn't gone over 75 yards in 5 straight games. Like, I just don't see the individual piece on the Kansas City side that is going to exploit those edges that you highlighted.
Yeah, and I think that that's fair. And that's why I think that I think the Ravens are going to win this game. I think it's not going to be particularly close. And a lot of the reasons you outlined there are why. I'm just saying there are at least a couple things here with this defense. As for the Chiefs defense, you keep bringing this up, and I think that it's really interesting how good the Chiefs have been after the break, which again is another path we have here, is that the Ravens start slow like they did in Houston, and then they try to turn it on after the break. And we even saw that with the Bills last week. The Chiefs defense after halftime, the adjustments that they're able to make, they've been outstanding this year.
Yeah, Spags has been really good, and Lamar was not good. It could have just been the time off because he didn't play in Week 18 either, and then it just took a little bit to click. But that offense definitely struggled the first 2 quarters against Houston, and we saw Houston really be aggressive. I mean, they blitzed Lamar Jackson by far the highest rate he has this season. They played a lot of man coverage, and we know we're going to get a lot of similar things from the Chiefs, right? Like, this Chiefs defense has been aggressive all year. And they've been aggressive when they faced the Ravens in the history of this matchup. I mean, granted, these teams haven't played since 2021, so like we won't preen like under the hood like of all these things like the Chiefs did. But Spags has dialed up a ton of blitzes when he's faced Lamar Jackson. He's really wanted to see Lamar Jackson beat him against the blitz, and Lamar Jackson has done that this season against teams. He's been good against man coverage. He's been really good against the blitz. The one area I think where you look at where you say like clearly where the Ravens are going to try to exploit the Chiefs or what the blueprint the Bills laid out, right? Like using Josh Allen in unison with this top-down running game and with their mobile quarterback. And I think we're going to see a lot of that in this game. And the last time these teams played, granted, like I said, a grain of salt, it was 2021. The Baltimore Ravens used Lamar Jackson as like a power runner in that game, like frequently to combat like the aggressiveness of the Chiefs defense. It was a way worse version of the Chiefs defense, but the Chiefs have given up a ton of rushing production to quarterbacks because they're such a hyper aggressive defense. And that's kind of, we know the Ravens are going to have, and they're out as an offense in this game. So I expect to see a lot of Lamar Jackson runs in this one for sure. But yeah, from a passing perspective, I don't really see a lot of clear advantages for either of these teams in terms of like a top-down passing game. Like the leading receiver in this game could definitely have like sub 70 receiving yards.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And I do think that when I'm looking at this game, I am thinking about Lamar Jackson's rushing as the trump card and saying, if I'm trusting any part of either of these offenses to really have a lot of success, it is the Ravens running game, led by Lamar Jackson, as we saw in the second half last week against the Texans. He actually had one fewer carry in the second half against the Texans last week than he had in the first half, but all of his carries were designed runs. They very clearly saw something that they were able to do, and he had a ton of success, and that offense was able to pull away. We also saw them have success against a tough Texans front, running the ball in general late in the game. We saw them have some success after Gus Edwards left with it kind of looked like a hand injury. We saw Dalvin Cook come in and have success. Obviously, Justice Hill has kind of been the lead back. So you look at, even though there's not, and this is kind of tough from a fantasy perspective, you would go, if there was only one guy here, I'd be really excited about that guy. Like if
Yeah.
I could play Justice Hill and Gus Edwards together in a DFS lineup as one spot, I'd be excited about that person. We don't really have that, but I still think that the Ravens running game, that is when I'm looking at where's the most offensive success going to come from, that's the spot that really sticks out to me where we could find some success. Let's actually talk about some of those individual fantasy plays. I do think you mentioned the passing game. I do think that the kind of Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, that situation is interesting from a DFS perspective and kind of how you're going to attack this. I mean, Flowers has a lot working against them this week, and I think that when Andrews comes back, if Andrews comes back, that makes it worse. And so it's really tough to get excited about him, or I guess really any Ravens pass catcher in this matchup.
Yeah, it is from like a ceiling perspective. You look at Zay Flowers, he has, only top 75 yards in 2 games this season. He's only gone over 70 yards in 6 games, and just 2 of those have come in games that Mark Andrews played. We talked about some of the splits last week, and he doesn't even have an end zone target in a game that Mark Andrews has been active, or doesn't have an end zone target with Mark Andrews on the field this entire season. And we always have been just fading all season regularly wide receiver ones against the Chiefs. And the job that they've done. We had the Stephon Diggs unders. He helped us out maybe by not pulling in that ball at the end of the game that Bills fans are going to lament over for basically the entire offseason. Or if it comes to be that Stephon Diggs is no longer a Buffalo Bill, they will constantly remember that one play from him. But the Chiefs have literally allowed the fewest yards per game to opposing wide receiver ones. So it's not a spot where you're looking for Zay Flowers to explode naturally anyways. There are some like underneath the hood split stuff that like would favor Odell Beckham if we would get Odell Beckham on the field. That's just kind of the question. He takes a step of faith to play. I think he is arguably my favorite like pay down wide receiver on the slate that take a shot on. But again, he only ran 8 routes last week, and it could just be because of the run game that they had going in the second half of that. But like, we need more run out. We need him to play more snaps than Nelson Aguilar. We need him to play more snaps than Rashad Bateman.
Well, and that's the problem, because last week we kind of were in the same spot, thinking, okay, this is their first playoff game. They've been limiting Odell. Are they going to actually unleash him and let him go? And it was the opposite. I mean, he played less last week, and so that suggests to me that they're limiting him either for an injury reason. I mean, he has been good per route, so I can't imagine it's a performance reason, but it doesn't seem like something's right there if they're once again playing him 10 fewer routes or letting him run 10 fewer routes than Nelson Aguilar. Something's not right there with Odell, and that makes it really tough to make that leap of faith this week.
Yeah, the one thing that development that's happened this NFL season, it's been especially highlighted by some of these playoff teams, and we have 2 here, is this new thing where we play like 6 receivers, right? It's not been fun for fantasy football this year. Like the Packers obviously were like the poster child for this. And like really we have this, like the Chiefs have rotated receivers all year, like personnel, and they're trying to like find a group that works for them. The Ravens the same. And that's kind of been a thing with the NFL. If you don't have like even these teams that have like a lead wide receiver, the secondary guys are constantly rotating, right? And like, I don't want this to be a development where we have to completely play like this whack-a-mole game every week with these players. But that's what happened when you look at these 2 receiving units in this particular game, and on a 2-game slate with 4 teams, from a DFS perspective, it makes it hard because it limits the ceiling of all these guys. Even when you get a touchdown from an Odell Beckham or a Josh Reynolds or whoever, like the guys just don't have enough ceiling because you don't run into like those 8 target games with any of these players.
Yeah, and it's tough. I do wonder, are there just not? I mean, I do think we have a wide receiver issue right now in the league. I mean, there's still obviously
always
very
has
elite
been,
guys. Yeah, I do wonder. This draft class is supposed to have a lot of wide receivers, like a ton. Like there might be 7 first-round wide receivers. We're going to have a really big draft class. So I wonder if that change or those people come in and we see some big changes. I hope that it works out. We haven't had when's the last like truly great receiver class that we had? Was it like
I mean, 2
wasn't
years
there like a
ago.
Mike Evans?
I mean, 2 years ago.
What was 2 years ago?
This year, I mean, Olave, Garrett Wilson, Drake London.
Eh,
We've been running super hot at wide receiver, actually. Like wide receiver, we even had a bad
eh.
wide receiver class in
I
several
guess I
seasons,
think
several
about
years.
I guess I think about all the misses. I guess that's what my problem is I take the negative approach. Like for this week, Sky Moore is in my brain. And I'm like, all these wide receivers are bad because Sky Moore is stuck in my brain. But you're right. I'm probably just looking at it from a negative perspective. But I still don't think that what's that one draft? Was there a draft was like Mike Evans, OBJ, something like that?
Yeah, I was the same.
Was
That was I forget what the exact year was that, but I mean, we've been running hot though. Like the wide me and Pizzuta did a show on this last year where like our theory is we're not going to have a bad wide receiver class, kind of the way college football is played and the necessity with the way the NFL is played with 11 personnel, and everyone needs a wide receiver constantly in the NFL. Like I don't think we're ever going to have like a bad wide receiver class. I think
so hold on.
we're going to consistently see wide receivers drafted with capital and be warranted to be drafted with capital.
So you think this last receiver class, you would characterize this one as like a particularly good one?
Yeah, and
Like,
honestly, when you look at the production from the wide receiver class, it was awesome. We had one of the biggest wide receiver rookie production seasons we've had.
see, I when I look at this class, I don't really see. I mean, we have this in
That's
this
because
game
you
with
hate
Rasheed.
Quentin Johnson.
Well, Quentin Johnson, Jordan Addison didn't have a huge thing. We didn't see him
He
super
had 10
step up whenever
touchdowns.
Justin.
Jordan Addison scored 10
Yeah,
touchdowns.
he had touchdowns. But he wasn't leading the receiving game when Justin Jefferson
As a
wasn't
rookie.
there.
As a rookie, he had
Zay
10
Flowers,
touchdowns. That's a huge signal. He's
Ravens
good.
wanted. The Ravens wanted Zay Flowers to kind of step up and be that number one, and he hasn't had that massive production. Quentin Johnson is obviously, Quentin Johnson, and
I think your
gone
expectations
really
are
bad.
extremely
My
clouded
expectations
here.
for a first round wide receiver are pretty high.
Zay Flowers had
for these.
Zay Flowers had 900 yards and as a rookie in a passing team, team that didn't throw the football.
In this NFL, 900 yards to me isn't like the greatest thing in the world.
As a rookie?
No, it's not.
There's a massive signal. There's a massive signal for future success.
Because he was from an opportunity perspective, he had this massive opportunity as a rookie, and he got 900 yards. And I'm not
Puka
I like Zay
broke
Flowers
every record, every single rookie
That's
receiver.
the one. Yeah, Puka Nacua is great.
Rasheed Rice,
Puka Nacua was great.
A guy in this game. The two receivers in this game was a massive.
They didn't want to play him for a while.
Jaden Reed was a hit. Oh my goodness, crazy man. I think it's an absolutely ludicrous statement.
I don't know. I was not particularly moved by this draft class, and I like the guys. I like Zay Flowers. I think Jordan Addison's going to be good, but
we got so much more production out of this class than I think anyone expected. Really, to be honest, Tank Dell was a massive hit. Like people are like where he's going to be drafted in dynasties, startups moving forward. Jaden Reed, like all these guys were these guys were good.
You're talking about a lot of secondary receivers. You're not talking about Justin Jeffersons and Jamar Chases.
Sure,
that's the difference.
Well, I mean, we're 2 years removed from getting those guys, though. I mean, we had
those guys. Those are the guys that I'm expecting.
If in the first round, we're going to get those guys. Yeah, I think your expectations are way too high.
No, those are the first round receivers that I'm expecting. And by the way, allegedly, and I don't know, I'm not a scout. Allegedly, that's the first round guys we're getting this year, at least in those kind of first three guys. And so, yeah, I'll have higher hopes for those three. I think that if you're convincing yourself that what we saw from everybody except Puka, Puka was, lights out. But if you're convincing yourself that what we saw out of Zay Flowers this year is like an outstanding return for a first round wide receiver, I don't necessarily think that's true, with the understanding that I think Zay Flowers is good. And Zay Flowers, if he can have a Brandon Cooks career and be an outstanding wide receiver and a good pick at that point, but he's not, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, which is what kind of I'm judging how good was this class from like a front
no wide receiver was taken in above 20, right? Like it wasn't like
that is a fair response to that.
It was a typical year, and I think this draft class, maybe from a value stance, I think was one of the more valuable classes because all those guys I rattled off, like absolutely for where they were, the draft investment were supreme hits. Obviously Puka, but like Jaden Reed was a massive hit. Tank Dell was a massive hit. Rasheed Rice was a huge hit for the investment. But yeah, I mean, I think you just have to go back 2 years ago, and then like the guys that were drafted highly, like we had some significant hits. Like Garrett Wilson is legitimately that guy, and we're gonna see that eventually.
So I guess that I think we're having different conversations is kind of where this is coming from, is that I want Garrett Wilson and Jamar Chase, and I wasn't looking at it from like the Puka perspective. But either I don't know how we got this far down this pathway.
But we're not going to get a bad wide
back.
receiver class. It's either way. It looks like another good wide receiver class, and I question that we're ever going to have a bad wide receiver class like in the foreseeable future with the way the college football is played and the need for it in the NFL from a top-down perspective, the way the game is played.
So just one more thing on this. All right, so I'm going to not say the word bad because that's hyperbole and that's not it. We did not have front end wide receivers ones in this class. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. And I don't think that there was no expectations for those guys to be that.
Yeah. So that to me is not a great wide receiver class because you don't end up with front end all pro level wide receivers. And I guess that's more kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah. I care about very good players though, still too, and good players, and definitely finding value players that are good to contribute for my fantasy football team.
But it's a good wide receiver class then. It's not a great one, right?
Yeah, it was a very good wide receiver class.
Yeah, fair enough. Whatever. This is going to be a fun March and April for you and me.
I mean, listen, if the track record of the season shows, I'm going to come out right because my hit record versus you this year is very strong.
It's not bad. I won't lie to you about it.
Now we get guys like we'll definitely have pushback guys. I'm sure, like where we had guys like Quentin Johnson last year, where like we can doubt the draft capital or Mingo or like Rondell Moore, right? Like we're gonna have that again. That exists every year.
Yeah, Visca. Sorry, Pat Graham, Visca Chanel. Treylon Burks. All right, so Ravens running backs, real quick, from like a fantasy.
How scared are you? One more question to piggyback off of this, though.
Sure.
So Rashee Rice, obviously, like now it looks like they found out that he's like the clear wide receiver. How bullish are you on Rashee Rice for 2024 fantasy football? And you can even tie in, like, assuming Kelce doesn't come back. Like, how bullish are you going to be, or do you think that they add more?
Well, if we're talking about hit rates, Rashee Rice was one of my guys, and so I was higher on Rashee Rice than other people to start with, and so I'm probably not a good person to ask this question. I think Rashee Rice has all the makings of a clear number one wide receiver. I think that he has growth that he can make, and kind of the way that they're using him. I still think they're using him kind of with kid gloves. We saw it take a very long time for them to even trust Rashee Rice to be their clear number one and to play him that much. And I kind of think that's part of the Kansas City philosophy. And so I'm going to be very bullish on Rashee Rice, but I started from a very bullish position to begin with. And so that's tough. And then the other part of it is we could see the offseason. We could see this change in the offseason. We could see them end up with one of these top receivers, although they're not going to be drafting in position to do that. We could see them bring in a high-end wide receiver. Are they going to flirt with DeAndre Hopkins again? I believe DeAndre Hopkins still has a year left on his contract.
Yeah,
but
Mike Evans or someone.
Is he still going to be there? Do they have enough money to even shop in the Mike Evans sweepstakes?
Probably not. Right?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, you look at it, they still have to figure out something with Chris Jones. L'Jarius Sneed has had his best season. It's going to be a free agent.
Sneed is going to be somewhere else. I'm relatively confident he's going to get JC Jackson money. And so that's going to be gone. But yeah, so I mean, it depends on what happens in the offseason. I could see another wide receiver come in. It would be interesting. What if it's T. Higgins? Who would you be more confident in, Rashee Rice and T. Higgins? That would be interesting. I think I might be more confident in Rice at that point.
Oh, no. T. Higgins is a better football player than Rashee Rice.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. I guess
he's not there. There's no way the Chiefs have T. Higgins money though available.
Yeah, you're probably right. If they don't have Mike Evans money, they probably don't have T. Higgins money. You're right.
Yeah, I mean T. Higgins, if he's allowed to walk, is probably going to go to a team that's going to have to overpay for T. Higgins, like a Carolina Panthers or something like that, right? Like a position and then you end up getting that run out where you overpay and it just wasn't worth the investment, which is typical free agency.
You're describing literally every market.
There's a reason free agents are free agents, by the way. I was trying to explain this to my son. Like, there's a reason why these players are available. Typically, it's either a guy like we talked about the L'Jarius Sneed route, right? A guy that's coming off a career year and then the team is priced out of being able to retain that player, or it's a player coming off of a down year and a team is trying to buy back on that player, like very rarely does like a good player in the prime of his career just is available in free agency. Like that's very, very rare.
Yeah. I am happy that we've done all of this in the conference championship preview
Yeah.
episode of the
So there's
podcast.
2 games to talk about.
Yeah, that's all we had. I do real quick before we move on to Lions 49ers, I do want to get your thoughts on the Ravens running back situation. And are you comfortable playing any of these three guys at this point in DFS at kind of where they're priced? Or is it just Justice Hill and take a shot that he gets a big play or some catches, or where do you stand on this situation?
I mean, well, in the context of the slate, you're probably going to have to. I mean, we only have 2 bell cows out of the teams that are playing, Isaiah Pacheco and Christian McCaffrey. So if you want to just say, I want to lock up those 2 backfields and just let that happen, so be it. It's going to cost you some coin to do. So you're probably going to have to play a compartmentalized backfield piece, whether it be the Lions, who are a little more clear, or the Ravens, who, are Justice Hill's been kind of their best player the past month. But we still know if they get inside the 5, like Gus Edwards is going to get those carries. So you might have just like a hollow yardage game. Like what's the ceiling for Justice Hill? This slate definitely revolves around like the potential ability of Christian McCaffrey just not having a 30-point game and just opening up viability for that, which is definitely a possibility.
I've already been there once this season and it did not work out, Rich.
Right.
Before you go down that road.
Yeah, so I mean, because it's Christian McCaffrey and then it's a bunch of guys afterwards, and Pacheco definitely is the next guy that you can count on for like in terms of volume. I mean, he's got 107 of 124 backfield touches in his games without Jerick McKinnon playing in full. But yeah, I mean, I have no problem like punting down a Justice Hill. I definitely believe if they get inside the 5, you're probably not going to get a Justice Hill touchdown. He's going to have to score a longer touchdown than that to score. But at his price, I don't mind it to where you can fit him in on this slate.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of where I am. That's what I ended up with Justice Hill last week was like, all right, I'm going to have to place a cheaper running back. And if I'm picking a cheaper
12
running
points
back,
help you.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where we ended up. All right, let's move on to Lions at 49ers. 49ers 7-point favorites, total 51. I do think we're probably going to see a lot of offense in this game. Will a lot of it be from the Lions? That's going to be an interesting question for sure. The first place we have to start here is where the conversation has been all week about Brock Purdy coming off of an absolutely dreadful game. And, he had the late comeback. They were able to win. They survived, I think is a better way to put it, what happened against the Packers. But the question becomes, what we saw from Purdy last week was that because of Deebo Samuel leaving that game twice, not being available in the second half, or was there something else going on? And based on what I read in the worksheet, I think you're in my camp and thinking that rain has had a lot more to do with the bad version of Purdy we've seen this year than Deebo Samuel not being in the game. Is that kind of where you are?
Yeah, I mean, well, anyways, the Deebo Samuel splits that you probably have already heard at nauseum, and the 49ers lost week 7 and week 8 when Deebo didn't play. The 49ers had won their previous 4 games without Deebo Samuel in the lineup before that. So it's like not like you can go back to some worse versions of 49ers teams and find out, oh, Deebo didn't play. Well, they were also not as good of a team when he didn't play either. They had a 4-game winning streak without him prior to these 2 games. And when you go under the hood of those 2 games that the 49ers lost out Deebo Samuel, I mean, they were good in those games from a yards per play basis. Brock Purdy was good from a passing perspective, from an efficiency perspective. They just turned the ball over. And guess what happens in the NFL? When you turn the ball over multiple times, you don't win a lot of games. And that's what happened in week 7 and week 8.
I feel crazy because I feel like you and I have had this conversation 5 times this year about that 3-game losing streak, in which people kept talking about it. And I go and look at their offensive numbers. Like Purdy averaged 9.1 yards per attempt and 11.8 yards per attempt in those second of the 2 losses. He just turned the ball over, and Purdy can do that, especially if you get pressure on him, which is something the Lions can do, to be fair to them. And so that can happen to Purdy, and he can throw some interceptions, and that's what happened. But acting like the offense was bad in those 2 games without Deebo, I think is not really looking at the whole picture of what actually happened in that game. And that's why these Deebo splits, and they're going to be brought up a lot this week. They already have been brought up a lot this week. That's why these Deebo splits are very odd to me. Would it be better to have a healthy Deebo Samuel? Obviously, it's better to have a healthy Deebo Samuel. But it's not like this death knell because they also have Brandon Ayuk and they also have Christian McCaffrey and they also have George Kittle. And it's odd to me that that's been so much of the focus coming out of this really bad game from Purdy against the Packers.
Yeah, and even watching the Packers game, you like to go back to anything like outside of maybe using Deebo Samuel like as a rusher and some near the line of scrimmage stuff in the elements, like it was still all just conducive to the way Purdy played and those conditions. I mean, he's had 2 games this season where he's had an inaccurate target rate over 20%. It was this week in the Cleveland game. Obviously, the common denominator is like
What did those
Deebo
have in
leaving those
common? Yeah.
games. But yeah, they played those games in terrible weather. And then you can talk about maybe some of the defensive stuff too. But like he's running into a matchup here that like you're not scared of on any level. Like missing Deebo Samuel versus the Lions, we don't even know if he's going to miss this game. But even if you take Deebo Samuel off the field and you look at Purdy splits with Deebo Samuel off the field, including the Packers game, including the Browns game, he still would have led the NFL in quarterback rating. He would have led the NFL in yards per pass attempt. He would have led the NFL in completion rate. Even with those games factored in, like, yeah, I mean, I think the Deebo stuff, the splits are definitely being completely overblown for those reasons. Like, you need Purdy to protect the football. That's what has to happen. He should have threw two interceptions in that Packers game, to be fair. Like, he should have. They dropped both of them. Darnell Savage definitely isn't rewatching that game because he dropped that first interception, and he was also the guy that completely, whiffed on Christian McCaffrey's 39-yard touchdown run.
Yeah, it's tough scenes for sure.
Mm.
You're not gonna like watching the film of that one. So yeah, I think at this point what we saw from Purdy last week, I'm willing to say, I'm at least going to be a little bit more concerned, but I'm willing to say that in good weather, which is what we're expecting against this Lions defense, which is really bad. And I think that that's the kind of the next way we should go, that I think Purdy's going to have a very, very good game. The one aside, and I brought this up, is pressure, right? Nearly half of Brock Purdy's interceptions this year have come in situations in which he was pressured without a blitz, which is something that the Lions can do. The Lions are 8th this year, or 6th, excuse me, this year in no blitz pressure. And so they can do that. They can get Purdy into those situations. He still averages a lot of yards per attempt. He still averages 8.5 yards per attempt in those situations, but you can get him to throw interceptions. And that probably is the only way that the Lions are shutting down this 49ers passing attack. That or Purdy is just bad again. And that's not what we've seen through most of the year. Those to me feel like the only way that the Lions really have a chance, because if you just look at their pass defense and what they've done over the back half of the season, it's been bad. And I like to read this out. I read this out on the Sunday podcast. I'm going to say it again. This is just reused notes for me. They get 411 passing yards to Nick Mullins, 345 yards to Dak Prescott, 396 yards again to Nick Mullins, 367 yards to Matthew Stafford, 349 passing yards to Baker Mayfield. I mean, this defense can't stop the pass. Last week they couldn't stop the run. I don't know how they stop this 49ers offense. It's going to be really tough for them.
Yeah, they're the first team in NFL history to allow 300 passing yards and multiple touchdowns in 5 straight games. They do have 9 interceptions over that span you stretch. Like, that's the out, right? Like, they have to get some turnovers. They have to continue to create turnovers, and that's in a 1-game single elimination setting. That you win the turnover battle, you already see the percentages that you have a chance to rise up, and you can protect Jared Goff a little bit, right? Like, you're not putting Jared Goff in these spots. That's their out. They have to get turnovers, and Purdy has gotten away, with some stuff. So they have to find a way, because you have to assume from an efficiency basis, like a yards per pass attempt game, like Purdy's probably going to be good here. So you have to get those turnovers.
Yeah, and I mean that's what happened in those second 2 games, not that Cleveland game, that second 2 games of the loss. That's what we had, and I think that that's really fair. Any worry about McCaffrey against this defense? Because I mean they've been very good against running backs all season. We didn't see a ton of carries from Rachaad White last week, but 3 of his 9 carries went for more than 10 yards. He did have some success on the ground against this Lions defense, and that is not something we've become accustomed to seeing against this defense.
I don't think like massive concerns, but I mean, if like there was a game for him to have like some bouts of inefficiency, like this would be one of the matchups. But when you look at the guys that have had the most successful games against the Lions this season, they are combo backs. guys that can, catch the football out of the backfield. And, obviously we're getting that with McCaffrey. I feel like half of the inaccurate targets Purdy threw were like, those Texas routes to McCaffrey last week. Like every McCaffrey Texas route was like sailed or like thrown into the dirt. But yeah, I mean, you look at McCaffrey, he's now played 31 games of the 49ers. He got 36 touchdowns. Like he is kind of the lifeblood of this offense. They faced two teams that were in the top 10 in yards per carry this season. And one was the Bucks, who they faced with some guys missing. And McCaffrey was good in that game as a combo back. And the Vikings was the other game. He only ran for 3 yards per carry in that game, but he still had 50 yards receiving and scored 2 touchdowns in that game. So probably something similar to that in this game. We didn't talk about too like the injuries of the Chiefs, like the offensive line, and like the Lions have some of those. Like Joe Thuney's probably not going to play in that game. And then the Lions, are going to be out a couple guys too. So like there's some wrinkles here in the trenches that are going to impact this game too as well.
Yeah, Jonah Jackson is definitely missing this game. Frank Ragnow is hurt. You brought up Joe Thuney. I mean, Joe Thuney missing for the Chiefs is big, especially from a pass protection standpoint, and it's certainly something that we'll need to watch. I guess that leads us right into Jared Goff when we're talking about offensive line injuries and what we're expecting from him against this defense. This defense sets up really poorly for Goff based on what they're able to do in the middle of the field and the fact that they're able to get pressure and what we know happens to Goff if you're able to disrupt him and get pressure.
Yeah, I mean, this is another thing where, like, obviously, hundreds of people are going to listen to this show and millions of people watch stuff at the NFL Network and ESPN. And the first thing people are going to talk about with Jared Goff is that if this is a road game for Jared Goff. It doesn't matter that it's a road game for Jared Goff. Yeah, he has awesome like home road splits, but like the things that have impacted Jared Goff on the road are weather, like we said with Brock Purdy, and this is stuff that's gone back for Purdy in college, and it's gone back for Goff in college. Remember Goff's pro day where Pep Hamilton's like dumping water on the football? Do you remember that? Like,
yeah, he had like a spray bottle. He was spraying it with water, right? Like you do your cat.
Because he had the smaller hands. But you look at like when Goff's played on the road against bad defenses or in good weather, like he's been largely fine. He faced Tampa Bay on the road this season, a team we targeted with everybody, and he roasted them. His other road games this season were at Kansas City, at Green Bay, at Baltimore, and at Chicago. Guess what? A lot of quarterbacks have been really bad in those spots. Jared Goff was still top 10 in the NFL in yards per pass attempt and passing yards per game on the road this season. The thing that matters for Jared Goff is something we talk about all the time, and it's, are you able to disrupt Jared Goff? Can you move him off his spot, and can you pressure him? So far, for quarterbacks that have played multiple games this postseason, no quarterback has been pressured at a lower rate than Jared Goff in this postseason. And when he's been kept clean, he's been immaculate. He's 42 of 51 passing, 470 passing yards, all of his touchdowns. He's only thrown for 4.9 yards per pass attempt in the small sample that he's been pressured. And over the course of the season, 6.3 yards per pass attempt against pressure. You have to be able to pressure him. The 49ers can do that. The other area you hinted at is the 49ers are number 1 in the NFL in pass defense, numbers to numbers. No quarterback's on a higher rate of his passes, numbers than Jared Goff this season, 57%. So it is kind of just a top down from a matchup stance, has way more to do with this than anything than Jared Goff not playing in Detroit.
Yeah, and I also want to bring up against pressure because we talked about Purdy's pressure and that being an out for the Lions. You pressure Purdy, you can force some interceptions. That is also true of Jared Goff. 9 of his 12 interceptions this year were against pressure. And so maybe we just have a game where both quarterbacks throw 2 interceptions. We have a zero turnover differential. And so it doesn't, it ultimately doesn't matter what the Lions are able to do on defense from a turnover perspective. That does lead us into Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam LaPorta, 2 players that, especially Amon-Ra St. Brown, are going to operate across the middle of the field as well. It's tough to imagine that we're going to get where you want to attack this 49ers defense. Amon-Ra does work in those areas, and he can obviously be very good. He's a very good receiver. He can be, he can attack them in those spots. He's going to get a lot of targets. He can certainly get there for fantasy, but this is a game that you're not really expecting a ceiling outcome from St. Brown unless they just have to throw so much and they're down and he ends up with 17 targets. Other than that, like on a per target basis, I don't think we're really expecting a ceiling here from him.
No, I think you're very similar to when they like both of these guys, like when they played Baltimore earlier in the year, and Amon-Ra still had 102 yards in that game, but it took him 19 targets and 13 catches to get those 102 yards. That's probably something similar, like what we're looking like here. He's not going to bottom out because he gets too many targets, and Ben Johnson's too good to know that they're not going to win this game
Absolutely.
throwing through Josh Reynolds and Jameson Williams. So he's going to get his raw production, I still think, too, and provide you he's not going to brick for your DFS lineups. He might not get you a point per dollar return, but also when you look at the context of the slate, it's not a great wide receiver slate. We basically glossed over all the wide receivers in the first game. And then you just are stuck with Brandon Ayuk and Amon-Ra as like the headpins here. And then we're waiting to see like what happens with Deebo Samuel and the trickle down effect, but it's not a huge pay up. It probably isn't a 4 wide receiver lineup game for DFS.
Yeah, I mean, last week I tried to convince myself and Mecole Hardman, and it almost worked out. To be fair, we were we were a half yard away from it really working out, and then it really, really didn't work out. From the target perspective, that's the argument you're making for Sam LaPorta as well. And to be fair to LaPorta, I mean, he does have some high target games this year. He's got a couple 11 target games in the last 5 or 6 games that he's played, and so there is a possibility here for LaPorta as well. He did DNP on Wednesday. I do want to bring that up. I'm not that worried about it because he looked a lot healthier last week, and I haven't heard anything about a setback. But it is certainly something worth watching. Um, as we move through the week, we're recording this on Thursday morning, so we don't have their practice report beyond Wednesday. You mentioned Brandon Ayuk on the other side. If we're talking about from a yards per target situation, a yards per attempt situation, we're going to expect a lot out of Brock Purdy. A lot of those targets are probably going to go to Brandon Ayuk, especially if Deebo Samuel is out. And if Brandon Ayuk is getting he's already very good on a per target basis, has been all season. The concern we've had with Brandon Ayuk has been how many targets is he getting? If Deebo Samuel is out or limited, and I don't imagine there's any scenario where he's better than limited coming this week, we're going to expect more targets for Ayuk against this defense. I mean, the case for Ayuk is so simple this week. I guess the question is, do you just put him in 100% of your DFS lineups and figure out the rest? Because there, like you said, there aren't a ton of other really high end options that we're excited about. So I think you
Mm-hmm.
just play Ayuk and just go from there.
Yeah, 100%. I even think I hope Debo does try to play, and maybe it
Me
just
too.
gets some people to push off of Ayuk a little bit. Because I think even with Samuel playing, it's just a really good spot for Ayuk. I mean, we've been targeting these outside wide receivers against the Lions for weeks. For weeks. I mean, since week 7, I mean, they're 27th in receptions allowed per game to wide receivers, allowed the most receiving yards to wide receivers, 30th in touchdowns. And when you siphon that off and dissect it from the outside, they're 29th in receptions allowed to outside receivers, 31st in yards per game, 32nd in touchdowns per game. And they have, to be fair to the Lions, they have faced some really good wide receivers like over the back half of the year. But like the thing is, they're not limiting these wide receivers to like 90 yards, right? Like they're getting absolutely
Every
flooded. Like
single one gets there.
yeah,
Every
like
single
they're
one of
giving
them
up
gets there.
huge games. They're giving up the 147s and ones, the 13 for 227 and ones, the 12 for 192 and ones. Like they're giving up crooked numbers. It's not just like, hey, they're facing Justin Jefferson and Justin Jefferson had 100 yards. It's Justin Jefferson went for 192 yards and a touchdown against them. Puka Nacua goes for 181.
With
Like just
I have to keep saying this with Nick Mullins at quarterback. That is
Nick
such an
Mullins.
important that is such an important addendum
It is.
to how bad this pass defense has been. Is they gave up 400 yards and then nearly 400 yards to Nick Mullins in 2 of their last 5 games. It's wild that has happened.
And Ayuk still probably isn't a guy that we can bet on pushing like 10 plus targets because it just, it's happened once this season. But getting him from the 6 target range to the 8 to 10 target range is a huge deal for a guy that's had that kind of efficiency and in this type of matchup. So, I mean, definitely, I definitely believe when you look at the way this slate's going to be played from a meta perspective, just putting him in every lineup makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I'm there with him as well. And I mean, also with Kittle, this is a great spot with Kittle. We've highlighted this several times already this year. When one of the wide receivers is out, and I especially feel this way about Deebo Samuel, when Deebo Samuel is out or limited, that Kittle gets a massive spike in his usage. This is a great matchup for him. We expect this passing game to be efficient per target, and I think Kittle is going to get a lot more of those targets if Samuel is out or limited, which again is my expectation. So not a ton we need to talk about Kittle, but this is again a really, really good spot for him as well. The secondary receiving options, you're right, we glossed over them in the other game because I can't convince myself to play Kadarius Toney. Kadarius Toney's probably back. He full practiced on Wednesday. We're going to get excited about Kadarius Toney. There are at least some interesting secondary options in this game, with especially if Debo's out, with Juwan Jennings and what we saw from him from a usage perspective last week. Josh Reynolds, he's setting up well as a primarily outside receiver. He does play in the slot like a third of his snaps, but primarily outside receiver against this 49ers defense. So he's interesting. Obviously, you get a big play out of Jamison Williams. There are some secondary receiving options here that are at least interesting. Any of them really stick out to you?
I mean, not from like a standout perspective, but you're gonna have to play some of these guys in these games, right? Like we talked
Yeah.
about, like it's only a 4-team slate. You're gonna have to take some shots on some guys. If you're taking a shot on Josh Reynolds, he's tied for the team lead with Sam LaPorta with 10 end zone targets. Like they're dialing plays up for him. Like that play to him was a design play, for him to get wide open last week, and they've done that this season. Jameson Williams is playing a lot more, but what kind of ceiling are we getting? The ceiling might not matter on the slate anyways. You're just going to need some raw points out of some of the jamokes you're going to have to play, whether it be, any Chiefs wide receiver, Odell, or these.
I always like when you bring out the jamoke. The jamoke always makes me.
Yeah, there's a lot of jamokes, man. Listen, Juwan Jennings is one of these guys that, like, if you're a 49ers fan, your father-in-law loves Juwan Jennings, right? Like he's like talking about it's like 3rd and 8 in a critical moment, and he's like, they got to go to Juwan Jennings here. Like that, like he's that type of player. And he's been like really viable when the 49ers had the call on his number. I mean, Brock Purdy's best throw last week was that throw to Juwan Jennings, and he made the tough catch where he gets blasted in the small of his back in the middle of the field. When Deebo Samuel missed week 7, he had a season-high 9 targets. Now, the following week, he had 0 targets on 33 routes also when Deebo Samuel missed. So it's not like
rolling those dice.
Yeah, it's not like he's a locked-in like target benefactor here. And we know the 49ers have a concentrated volume tree anyways, because there just isn't, like, Purdy's not going to throw 40 times probably. We're probably not going to get that. So you are rolling those dice, but all of those guys have like a layer of intrigue to them in this game that definitely still could go over. I think when you look at this team too, because we talk about this Lions defense. So the top 3 scoring defenses in the NFL are all playing this weekend. Ravens are 1, Chiefs are 2, 49ers are 3, Lions 23. But if you look at like those 3 defenses that I named off that are 1, 2, 3, definitely the 49ers of those 3 defenses over the course of the season have had the most moments where they look vulnerable. And, whether it be a game like, Kirk Cousins was really good against them, and Joe Burrow, and are we going to put, Jared Goff into the category of those guys? Well, definitely Kirk Cousins, right? Like if you get into a rhythm, like as a rhythm passer. But the 49ers definitely, out of the 3 best defenses that are here, have had like the large. We see in the first half last week against the Packers, right? The Packers were in the red zone every possession. I think the Packers were in the red zone their first 5 possessions last week. Out of the 3 top down defenses, they've been the most shaky.
And we talked about with the Chiefs and Ravens, we're talking about where are you finding the holes in these defenses, because these defenses are very good. The holes in the 49ers defense are obvious. The Lions have a very good offensive coordinator who might be a head coach next year, and he's going to be able to see these holes on the outside and the perimeter guarding those receivers. That's a place you can attack them. And then outside runs on the edges, which we saw the Packers really take advantage of last week with Aaron Jones. And we look at this Lions backfield, this Lions running game, which probably is the strength of their offense. And we see, Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs fits really well with what we saw from Aaron Jones and the runs that Aaron Jones was having a lot of success with. I know you had an interesting stat in the worksheet, actually, again, at sharpfootballanalysis.com, go and read it, that David Montgomery's actually been more successful on those runs, which is interesting. It is kind of a smaller sample, but I think Gibbs really fits in to what we saw the Packers do successfully last week. Mm-hmm. And if the Lions can get Gibbs in those situations, again, they have a very smart coaching staff. I'm guaranteed that if my dumbass saw this, that Ben Johnson understands that this is where they need to attack this defense, that they are going to attack with Gibbs on the edges, and that gives them, again, a chance to score and maybe even keep up with this 49ers offense. So I agree with you that there are options here for the Lions against this defense that maybe there aren't in the other game. And that's why I do like the over here, even at 51 points.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter that Montgomery's kind of been more efficient. Well, it just gives him an extra out, right? Maybe like you don't want to completely ignore Montgomery in DFS because he's been good on like those outside runs. Because it's counterintuitive. Like Montgomery's been more efficient on outside runs than inside runs, and Gibbs has been more efficient on his inside runs than Montgomery. But it doesn't matter because the guy still the usage is Gibbs is getting the more of the outside carries, which is what we want to chase. We're chasing opportunity first always. And then
Yeah.
Montgomery has been used as more of that inside runner. But maybe it just gives you a signal, say like, don't completely ignore Montgomery because every DFS slate, basically since week 10 on, the ownership disparity between Montgomery and Gibbs is massive. It's always Gibbs is like 30% higher owned than Montgomery almost every single slate. So if you want to kind of get more unique, maybe you don't play Gibbs because he's going to be the more popular play. And the one interesting thing about this playoffs is like Montgomery has been the guy they've actually trusted more. He's playing a lot more than Gibbs. The usage is still like where Gibbs is, but like maybe to a detriment too, because almost against the Bucks, it was like Gibbs looked like the better player last week, and it took them 3 quarters to finally start using him. And
then he blew the game open.
Yeah, and then he blew the game open, gave them the lead. So, but it is interesting that with the chips on the table, the Lions have kind of gone away from like Gibbs having the snap edge because Montgomery has been there, and it could just be game script related too. But we've seen with Feet to Fire some of the time these coaches will be like, I want the guy that's better in pass protection. Like we got to get him in. And that's kind of what's happened. But you want to check. You got it. You want to attack the 49ers and the edges in the run game.
You got to use Gibbs. They have to use Gibbs in that respect. And I have enough faith in this coaching staff that is what we're going to see here. And so, yeah, I'm expecting a good game. And the other thing about Gibbs is that if for some reason the Lions do go down big, right? Let's say that the 49ers come out and score 28 in the first half, that Gibbs is at least going to be somewhat involved in the passing game. The Lions don't throw to their running backs as much as we would like, especially with Sam LaPorta healthy, but at least that gives him, a better out as well. I guess we do have to make some predictions about this game. I'm so boring with my predictions here because I just think the Ravens and the 49ers are very clearly better than the other two teams. And so I think we're going to see a rematch in the Super Bowl. But I guess I have to ask you this side of it. Who do you like in these two games?
Yeah, I like the Ravens 49ers rematch. It is chalky. I will say, I think the Lions +7 is live, though. I mean, history has shown that Dan Campbell as a dog is like your money's in solid hands, right? Like he's going to try to Dan Campbell's going to push to win this game. He's going to do, and we know Kyle Shanahan, it's the similar thing we talked about a couple weeks ago with when Sean McVay faced Dan Campbell. The Shanahan almost cost him last week, man. The way he managed that end of that first half possession where the 49ers could have double dipped, just absolutely a nightmare scenario. And we know at least Dan Campbell's he's going to at least do the things that are optimal for the team to win. That's why they're such a good cover team. Dan Campbell's like the best cover head coach since he entered the NFL, and they're really good with a lot of points. So if you are going to take someone with the points, obviously it feels weird to say like, don't take Mahomes with the points, but I do feel like you're probably drawing actually more live with your +7 than the +3 or +3.5. Feels very weird to say out loud.
Yeah, I don't like being in the position I am with thinking that I would still take the Ravens -7 in this game. And so I think you're getting a lot of value on that line. But yeah, I can't wait for Patrick Mahomes to make me look stupid. The other thing I'm annoyed about, you brought up the McVay thing. That's one of the hits you brought up earlier was the Lions over the Rams, but I still stand that I was right about that game. I believe very strongly that McVay lost that game against the Lions. I am so confused by that whole coaching staff and how they decide they're so smart. They're so like this whole like kind of tree, and I know Shanahan and McVay are not exactly from the same coaching tree. They did work together very obviously, but like there's something about those coaches that they just in big situations they just kind of clam up and they don't take advantage and they don't go for the fourth downs they should and they don't push for the touchdowns they should. And I don't get it because they're so smart and they're such good offensive coaches that it's hard to connect those two things in my mind. I don't understand it, but we've seen it a lot now. We saw it earlier in this playoffs with both of these guys that it's such an odd thing. And I think your point about Campbell's the opposite of that. Campbell's going to go for it. He's going to bite them kneecaps and he's going to give them every chance to win. And I think it's a really good point from you. I think I'm probably taking over 51. And then I mean, that 44.5 feels like the biggest stay away in the world to me. Is that kind of where you are on those?
Yeah, I like if like a standalone bet in this game, if like you force me to pick, I think I would just bet 49ers team total. And like
That's a good one.
that would
Yeah,
be
that's a
like
really
the
good one.
route I would take. I lean if you're forcing me like to say like, hey, we've got to make a definitive pick against the spread. I would say just I'll blindly take the +7. But
Yeah.
yeah, for that
That's
reasons
where
we
we are.
laid out, right? Like it could be a game because +7, you could be the 49ers could be up 10 double digit points the whole game, and you just give me that back door.
Yeah, that's interesting sentence. That is a yeah. No, I think that's where we are. All right, that's it. Let's hope we get another good week. It was a really good week of games. I mean, Baltimore, Houston aside, we can put that one aside. At least it was the first game of the week. It was a really good. It was a really good week of games last week. I hope we're going to get two really good ones here, and we will be back. Not next week. We won't be back next week. We're going to take a break along with the rest of the NFL. I mean, do you want to come on and break down the Pro Bowl skills competition? I guess we could do that. That might be fun.
I mean,
But no, we're going to take a break.
Josh Allen, I heard, might play in the dodgeball game, so it could be like some Billy Madison type stuff. If Josh Allen's
I
throwing
will
dodgeball.
watch that. I want that to be on record. If Josh Allen is in the dodgeball competition, I won't watch it live. That's going to
Oh
be a
no, no,
time
no.
shift, but I will watch it on YouTube at some point if that's in there.
Can you
But yeah,
imagine
we'll
if
be
Josh
back
Allen
Super
like
Bowl week.
tore his rotator cuff like throwing a dodgeball?
Can you imagine if someone ends up with a concussion because Josh Allen hit him in the head with a dodgeball? Like, we could be seeing the end of the dodgeball competition and in the Pro Bowl skills if Allen is involved.
Yeah,
But
pour one
like I
out for
said, yeah, we
Josh
won't be.
Allen, man. Like you said, that like I think you brought up a multiple like a single game elimination tournament, and the Bills have been on the short end of that repeatedly. And I know everyone's frustrated and they're trying to question. It's weird the way football dynamics work from a talking perspective because everything is about is Josh Allen good enough now because the Bills haven't won in a single game elimination tournament. But inversely, like you have a guy like Brock Purdy who like wins games and then people like tear down. It's the whole way like the media covers football is weird.
I mean, it's just the way people talk about Dan Marino is wild. Like we're doing the same thing over and over again. Like this notion that we see it somewhat in the Peyton versus Tom debates. I mean, that became less of a debate as the years went on and Brady's longevity and all of that. But early in the debates, we saw the same thing as
Yeah.
well. And it's just the way people talk about Super Bowls as if the best player every year and the best team every year win the Super Bowl is wild to me. And we see that in all sports, but especially is true in football. It's especially true in college with national
Mhm.
championships. And it's odd to me because the best team does not win every year. In fact, I would say the best team wins maybe 50% of the time in these things. Like it's odd to me that we are in the single elimination in a league that we literally have a saying that says any given Sunday that we think that means like because the Panthers beat the Texans this year on a random Sunday, does that mean that the Panthers are definitely better than the Texans and the Texans need to reevaluate where they are with CJ Stroud? No. So why would we apply the same thing in the playoffs? It's just odd. And the Bills have they've gotten a little unlucky. They've gotten beat a couple times in this run as well. But two of these games against Kansas City were coin flip games, and they came out on the wrong side of the coin flip. And, you know, that's the way your legacy, unfortunately, that's the way legacies are written. That's the way we talk about this sport, but it is really unfair to, especially Josh Allen, who was amazing in that game, to kind of talk about the sport in that way.
100%.
But anyway, I'll get
Can't
off
say
my
it better.
soapbox. I'll get off my
I can't say
soapbox.
it better.
And we'll be done. We'll be back to talk with you in 2 weeks. Might have a special guest on the podcast. Maybe Mr. Warren Sharp will be joining us here in a couple weeks to talk about the Super Bowl. Make sure you go to Sharp Football Analysis. Check out all our coverage of this week's games, Super Bowl coverage. Remember our postseason package. You can get 75% off our weekly postseason plan using 75 off the promo code. Go and check that out. And like I said, we'll be back to talk with you in 2 weeks.